Hi students, today we're going to talk about deviant behavior, deviance, or deviant behavior. Please notice how intentionally I am pronouncing those words because I've noticed over the years that when people try to type this word or to spell it if they're writing it out, they spell it incorrectly. Sometimes autocorrect might get you and put the word defiant into the text instead of deviant because they're spelled very similarly, except deviant has a V, has a V, and defiant has an F. But deviant behavior and deviance, that's the topic of chapter 6. I think the title of chapter 6 is Deviance and Crime. We will be looking at crime, a particular type of deviance that goes against one of the types of norms that we call a law. But deviant behavior in general is a major topic in sociology because we've been talking about norms, we've been talking about social scripts and following behavioral patterns and all these macro scale forces that kind of push us toward behaving in a certain way, but not everybody always follows the cultural expectations that are part of the larger social structure. Some people go against those cultural expectations, and that's called deviant behavior. So you need some keywords to have a good definition of the word deviance, and that is any action, any belief, any condition that goes against those social expected norms, okay? So for instance, nakedness in public is a condition that violates social norms, okay? Beliefs such as belief in monogamy as a form of marriage is the norm in the United States. If your belief is that polygamy is fine too, you are deviant according to the norms of the majority of the United States. Actions, of course, are about behaviors. And so regarding monogamy, you're supposed to be sexually exclusive with that partner. And if you do not, if you act in promiscuous or unfaithful ways, that is deviant behavior about that particular behavior. Okay, so deviance is an interesting thing, and we're going to look at this in depth over the next couple of lectures. But at some point when we were first learning about culture, which is chapter 2, we wrote a list of facts or truths about culture. I think I called them truths about culture so you wouldn't confuse it with the concept of social facts that we had just learned in a previous week. Social facts being a vocabulary word from those early units or chapters that we learned, but that we have a list of truths about culture someplace in our notes. And you can flip back to that now because I don't remember exactly how we worded them that day when we put them on the board, but I know there were 3 and I've pretty much got them reworded, but along the same vein here on the board for our discussion of deviant behavior. So deviance, just like norms that are approved of, or culture in general that has customs and beliefs and traditions and language, etc., culture, norms, and deviance, they differ from place to place. So you cannot expect lifestyle, customs, traditions, and what's considered right or wrong to be the same in Mexico as it is in New Mexico in the United States, or Canada as it is in the United States. But you will even find much more diverse populations if you go to Japan compared to the United States, or Brazil compared to France, for instance. So there's different cultures in all of those places, and therefore the norms are different, and therefore whatever is considered to violate the norms or deviant behavior is also different. So we should not be surprised as social scientists, and if any of you are going into, say, the hospitality industry or social work or anything like that, where you are going to encounter people from wide different lifestyles, do not be ethnocentric. Don't apply your ideas for what's right or wrong to their notions of what's right or wrong, because if they come from a different place than you, you can rest assured that their ideas about what is quote, normal and what goes against normal or what is deviant is going to probably be very different from yours. Another truth about culture that is also true about deviance is that deviance differs over time. So I left the word differs out. I don't know why I did that now that I turn around looking at it, but what I mean is deviance differs over time. So as the generations progress, your attitude about life in general and the acceptability of some behaviors or the tolerance to some beliefs that are prevalent in society today is probably very different to your grandma and grandpa. For instance, some of you in your reaction papers, when you were looking at the dramaturgical analysis of social life and you looked at your own social script as it changed from one situation to the next, some of you mentioned that your behavior changes, your dress, your style of dress, whether you show a tattoo or not at grandma's house is very different than if you're out with your friends. So grandma, what is her idea about that tattoo? And over time, society, she is a product of her society, but over time, society has obviously changed enough so that, sorry, grandma, it's just fine now, right? In most people's eyes. So it differs over time. Deviance and ideas of deviance are going to change over time. And we'll look at that a little bit more. And also, deviance is in the eye of the beholder. So when you find those truths about culture in your notes, there will be something about subcultures and how different subcultures within a country like ours that has such diversity within it, there can be different parts of the larger society that have differing opinions from each other. You can think of it as like Republicans and Democrats, or think of it as evangelical Christians and atheists, or think of it as North versus South, right? Think about it as Hispanic versus African American. There are different subcultures within the larger society, and therefore, in their eyes, if they are beholding behavior, actions, beliefs, or conditions, there might be some ideas about what is appropriate and proper and what is not appropriate or proper that they have compared to you. So this is some of the otherness. There's a word, a buzzword that you will hear about in social sciences these days. Otherness, or identifying against other groups based on what you perceive deviance to be. You and your category of people perceive deviance to be. Okay, so this is an interesting thing to look at these truths about culture and apply them specifically to the topic of deviance. It's really interesting to look at a diverse culture such as the United States that does have vastly different groups within it that all come under the same flag, but we have vastly different attitudes, ideas, beliefs, conditions that one subculture has compared to others. And so it's really interesting to ask a question about dominant society. Dominant ideology is the term that you can look up for the definition of specifically, but the dominant ideology are the ideas that overlap all. If this subgroup has this idea and this subgroup has this idea, well, there still is an overarching umbrella in a society like ours that controls the dominant ideas that all of us are used, or all of us have inherited at birth, right? We are born into the society that we are born into. We're born into or adopted into the subculture that we have our upbringing within, right? So we learn certain things differently from each other based on our subculture, but all of those subcultures are subject to USA norms, for instance. So here's a great question that's an interesting question to look at, especially this day and age. Who is able to define what deviance is in society? And if we zoom out from this question and we say, well, where do norms come from to begin with? We can start to look at those groups that have power, historically have power and control and influence over society building, over law creation, over law enforcement. These kinds of law, it's not just, I don't just mean the boots on the ground law enforcement, but who are the lawmakers and the trendsetters over time? I'm not talking about a trend that, Katy Perry creates. I'm talking about trends in behavior that exist in the superstructure, social structure level, those patterned ways of thinking, feeling, and acting that someone perpetuates over time. I mentioned monogamy versus polygamy. So polygamy is a valid marriage pattern that is accepted in wide places all over the world, far and wide. You see polygamy acceptable as a marriage pattern. In the United States, there might be a person here or there, like that TV show that has like Sister Wives, is that what it was called? There might be a person here or there who says, I'm the husband and here's 5 women and I call them all wife. However, someone is in control of the laws in this country. And I don't just mean someone, but I mean a long chain of a controlling group that has said marriage does not have multiple spouses of the opposite sex. Marriage has just 2 spouses and 2 spouses only. And therefore, our legal system has evolved so that your Social Security is based on just 1 spouse at a time. Your retirement income can be inherited by just 1 legal spouse at a time. You don't have medical authority and decision-making power over somebody who is not your legal spouse. So even though I might have 4 husbands, if I'm only legally married with a marriage license to one of them, then if the 3rd one needs medical care and I want to speak for him in the hospital, but I have no piece of paper called a marriage license that says I am his next of kin, I just have called him husband all of these years and he has called me wife, because we're free to do that and we're free to behave that way if we want to. I still don't get to have that legal authority or right over him if I don't have that legal bond. And so, people say, oh, it's a free country. Well, sure, but we are a country guided by laws. And where did those laws come from? What's the dominant ideology that created those laws? And therefore, what is the dominant ideology that says you can do this or you can't do this other thing? It's inappropriate to do this, but it's not inappropriate to do this other thing. We can look at marijuana laws, for instance, if you want to look at who has the power to make something illegal and to enforce it. And I want to ask you to think about something really quick. Do you think Anheuser-Busch and Budweiser and Jack Daniels and companies like that really want marijuana to be readily available and openly available to people around the nation? Or do they want there to be some hoops to jump through as society is demanding that social change? Do you think that they have a vested interest, their bottom line, their profits, to keep marijuana harder to get? Well, sociologists have been interested in those kinds of questions, and for years and years, 20 years or more, some of the surveys that college students have provided answers for in sociology tell us that they would much prefer to have pot available widely than drink beer or drink hard liquor because of the after effects, like the day after effects. There's not like a hangover potential with marijuana, for instance. And so that information can be scary for people if you are promoting alcohol and you make your profit off alcohol, for instance. So interesting, right? These kinds of things. Why would this natural substance that has so many medicinal uses, why would this be so difficult to get in the legal system? Who has the power to say that that's deviant, to use it or to want it? And it's interesting to look at, on the macro scale, zoom out, who might be interested in keeping that activity, keeping that item illegal. So we will be looking at those kinds of dynamics in society during chapter 6, and also maybe some macro scale forces that might promote deviant behavior on us in the micro scale. See you next time.